ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us here in this recording. What we're going to talk about today is seeking CRM at Colorado Law. So, CRM stands for Reasonable Constituent Relationship Management. And in other worlds of business, it's probably customer relationship management. So in this session, what we're looking at covering is some background of how we got here at Colorado Law for our solution, kind of the challenges that we face, what role that Salesforce plays in this scenario, and then really we'll dive into the kind of that data synchronization piece, planning considerations, lessons learned there, and then we'll take a look at Colorado Law's implementation and how we're syncing data, and then lastly we'll talk about some project management. So I think we'll keep this pretty informal, pretty small group, so if you've got any questions, just go ahead and raise your hand, throw something, shout out, and otherwise catch our attention, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. So two presenters today, we've got Mike Burr here to my left. He is our developer at the law school. We're very fortunate to have him. And then I'm the IT director at the law school. So I handle pretty much, I guess, soup to nuts or anything that plugs into the wall or hits the battery generally falls somehow under my purview. So that's kind of who we are. So Colorado Law, we're a school in Boulder, Colorado, and we have 550 students that are active in the JD. We've got a new LLM program that's starting up this year, and also a Master's of Study of Law program. We have about 10,000 alums, and you can check out our website if you'd like to learn more. And we were founded in 1882. We've been around a couple of years in Colorado. And then the IT shop in Colorado, we're kind of a hybrid between a distributed shop, and we also leverage a lot of central IT services. So we've got 3.5 full-time equivalents on staff, a couple of awesome technicians, and then we've got our developer, Mike Burr, here. So anything like email, network, telecom, all of that comes from the central IT shop, and then anything that's custom just to law school, we provide internally. So in about 2013, this was, something that we had talked about was what do we do with data? Everybody was using spreadsheets, alumni relations had their own data set, foundation had their data, for development, admissions, all these different departments had their own data, and they were only sharing them via spreadsheets, so nothing was really linked up. And we realized that we were not tracking relevant data points. We couldn't follow the history of our prospects through current student to a long time. We had no way to manipulate that information very easily without taking the spreadsheets and trying to jam them together. So, the student life cycle to us was something that was very important, and we saw value in trying to look at data horizontally through the entire student life cycle, from who's applying to us all the way to who is successful when they graduate, and hopefully is a patron of the law school when they graduated and finished. So this was kind of an back in 2013, the different data sets that we were working with. Probably most of you are very familiar with the LICC ACES 2 tool. So we would have data there that would be manually exported via spreadsheet, put into ISIS, which was our student information system at that point in time. Terrorist one, we renamed it as the SIS, Student Information System. And then we used this really old tool called WinSmart, which was a shadow registrar system that we used to use, or still actually using, looking to switch out of. And then CD Online is our Simplicity CSM, Career Services Manager. But you see all these different data pieces. So Harris Connect was an email system the foundation would use. We had constant contact for mailing. Advance had their own data sets. So really the only linkages were these spreadsheets coming out of ACES and moving into these systems. So really the challenge for us was looking at how do we create efficiencies, improve the quality of our data and the reliability of that data via synchronization. And then also to identify trends across that data. Again, I mentioned what makes a prospect successful. Are there students that we should be looking at admitting who might not, appeal to other schools, but there's something unique that we know might give them success later in school and also taking the bar and also career-wise. And then really look at developing our relationship with these prospect students and alums across the life cycle so that we look, if we understand, okay, you're an alum, we know what classes. So if we know what your favorite professor is, and then also to answer questions of who clerked for a certain judge, who had a particular affinity for a faculty member who's retiring this year, what makes an alum successful, and really, what predicts success, particularly with employment history. So way back in 2013 and then moving to 2014, we started talking with this group on campus called the Office for Performance Improvement. This was kind of an internal CU skunk works that Mike Burr worked for back in the day. And he told us to go to this data model and looking at how we track all this information, how do we roll this up and how do we sync it. And I'll let Mike kind of take it from there.
Okay. Yeah, so the idea back in 2014 was really to develop a data model that tracked the entire student life cycle. And so this really encompasses the relationship starting from the prospect and applicant stage, going through the student stage, going to alumni, and then also we have this kind of group of non-alumni folks who we need to track, who are really what we would call friends and industry contacts. Yeah, we do a great job of developing relationships with employers, particularly those who don't have basically an alumni relationship with CU. And that's a really important aspect of our career development focus. We also tracked larger things about the student besides just simply what class courses they took, the grades they received. We consider, are they participating in clubs, are they participating in journals, are they participating in law school events? Which bar admissions do they receive after graduation? Because we know people could be certified in each state independently. And we are really interested in building out system integrations. As John mentioned, a lot of this data transfer happened with spreadsheets, where you basically dump a spreadsheet out of one of these systems. You might take a number of manual steps and then load it into another system. And our goal is really to produce at least reasonably cohesive system integrations that would allow us to do that without any of those manual steps and perhaps in a more automated way. Fundamentally, we have several long-term questions that we're really looking at. We want to look at what makes a prospective or current student successful at Colorado Law. And this obviously means both in academics as a student, as well as going into employment post-graduation. We really want to optimize bar passage rate and postgraduate employment placement. Obviously, that's a very hot topic nowadays in law schools. And we want to understand over time, as we identify at-risk populations, whether specific interventions at specific points in an at-risk population academic career with Colorado Law actually makes a difference in terms of their bar passage and basically postgraduate job placement. And this is one of those things that we're hoping to really look at over the next probably 5 years. So just a quick show of hands, like who here uses some sort of CRM system? Okay, so about 50%-ish. Salesforce?
Yeah.
Salesforce, okay. Simplicity? Okay, I've got a couple. Like a different one, like Dynamics? Okay, Microsoft Dynamics, okay. All these systems kind of have their strengths and their weaknesses. Let's talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of Salesforce, because that's the one that we implemented at CU, or in Colorado Law. We've actually also got a couple of instances floating around with other departments. Like we've got a centralized instance that our undergraduate school really uses. And we've also got a couple of instances, one specifically for our business school, and then a couple of other specialty instances out there. But we're really just focused on the Colorado Law instance here. So when we talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of Salesforce as a system for this purpose, it's easy to replace spreadsheets and reduce duplicate data entry. I'm sure somewhere in your organizations you can identify a number of spreadsheets that would be easily replaced by more of a normalized database model. Does everybody know what I'm talking about with the normalized database? Like where you basically, as opposed to having a flat file like in a spreadsheet where you have 100 columns, you basically say, oh, this block of columns actually goes out to and talks about what an event is. This block of columns talks about a person's relationship with that particular event. This block of columns talks about like an employment record. Obviously, if you flatten that data model, you essentially end up with a huge spreadsheet at the end of it. It's really easy to build out a normalized database model in Salesforce that is able to track these things. And it's basically point and click. You can drag and drop different fields. So you can drag and drop objects, and you essentially both construct your data model and your ability to edit it at the same time. It's easy to make modifications to those objects. So if you need to add fields, delete fields, change fields, constrain fields, like if you want to do pick lists and controlled and pick lists that are associated with another pick list, so that you can control the values that are presented to users. That's very easy to do, and it's pretty easy to pull data in and to take data out of Salesforce. There are various tools that are available in Salesforce. Like in terms of its main GUI, you actually have the ability to work through a data import wizard, an export wizard. There are a couple of external tools that rely on the API, like on the back end. One is Salesforce Data Loader. It's very powerful in terms of exporting and importing data. And this is more or less still on the manual process side. And there's actually a really strong API. They've got a couple of APIs out there. There's the REST API and the SOAP API. And we were primarily talking about the SOAP API because that's what we started our integration with. That's what we still use today. Salesforce has a lot of weaknesses. Reporting leaves a lot to be desired. Like it's missing a lot of the basics, particularly around aggregation. So like if you're going to build out a report where you're looking at median GPA, you can't do it in Salesforce. Plain and simple. You have to take that data and export it to another system in order to do aggregated reports that are high quality. There are various idiosyncrasies and arbitrary limits that make extending Salesforce difficult. Some of these were put in probably as an artifact of prior versions of Salesforce because they try to make everything backwards compatible. And some are put in for licensing purposes, basically to try to upsell you in terms of the cost that you're willing to pay Salesforce for their service. And this comes into a lot of custom development work in Salesforce. And if you've tried it, or if you've done custom development in Salesforce, you probably understand what I'm talking about. But otherwise, this is kind of a basic session, so we probably don't need to get any further into the details on it. None of the apps that we've looked at, including Salesforce Wave is their analytics tool, have lessened the gaps between Salesforce and basically what I would consider data science tools, such as R, SAS, SPSS, Python, any of the modern machine learning tools. You basically still have to have some sort of ETL process that gets you your data set that you use to fit models. When we have custom development actually out there in Salesforce, they have there's a couple of things that with Salesforce that you can develop within Salesforce natively. So they've got a tool called Visualforce, which is useful for putting together basic pages. And then you have basically Apex, which is a language that's a lot like Java that essentially allows you to build out very detailed custom functionality in Salesforce. What we found, at least internally, is that building with these tools is actually very, very expensive when you compare it with constructing just a regular ASP.NET application or a regular JSP application. It makes it a little bit difficult because you want to construct an architecture that allows you to have forms and user accessible components outside of Salesforce, but still have data represented in Salesforce in some way. And we can't skip that Salesforce was not designed for higher ed. It's really got a sales focus. There are aspects of the relationship management process that it doesn't capture well. So for example, you might have a student who comes in as a student, but then they work as a student employee for you. They are involved in a number of journals. They come to a number of events. They leave and they have a job history after they leave, and perhaps they have some sort of donation that they make to your university after they leave. Right there we identify like 6 relationships. Like Salesforce natively is really designed to handle basically the prospect phase, and then basically when they're currently a customer, and then historical customer records. It's not, you really have to extend it with a custom model to make it useful for mapping the relationships with students. So a little bit about, I've kind of touched on it already in this presentation about why to synchronize data. For us, Salesforce isn't really an authoritative source of information for us. We basically have all of our subgroups within our law school. They use external systems, many of which we don't control, but we may have access to, that store the authoritative information for their particular aspect of the student life cycle. So for example, admissions uses multiple systems, but primarily ACES 2. I'm sure folks in this room are pretty familiar with that system. Career development uses a tool called Simplicity CSM. Anybody else use Simplicity here? Couple? Okay. And then basically we have a number of CU enterprise systems. These are, do we have any campus solutions PeopleSoft users? Yeah, at least one. Okay. Yeah, we use campus solutions and PeopleSoft for our CU enterprise systems. Law registrar uses 2+ systems, WinSmart, which is one of the ones that John mentioned, and we also have heavy campus solutions used through our main campus infrastructure. And then we don't provision accounts directly in our IT department. Rather, we currently rely on our campus' single sign-on capability. For better or for worse, that's where we're at today, but there may be a change to that coming. And then for our advancement function, they use basically a system called Advance. And they also use a number of other systems to integrate with the other enterprise systems at the university level. So we haven't touched on it very well, but we have basically a weird structure at CU where we have basically the system level, and then we have 4 campuses. And then if we just go into the Boulder campus, we have a number of schools and colleges, and we're basically a school of law. And so we have IT departments at essentially all of those levels that perform various functions. When we talk about Salesforce, there are many things for which it does well, but there are a lot of other ways in which other systems are going to be cheaper, better, faster, or already exist for other things. So, for example, with Salesforce, when you first license your instance, you're given basically 1 gigabyte of data storage out there for your objects, which is pretty low. Like you consider that even like the free tiers like AWS and Google Cloud offer you 5 gigs. If you're implementing an application on like the free versions of like an Oracle Express instance or Microsoft SQL Server Express, you get 10 gigs there. It seems like their storage is very expensive for what it is, considering you also have to pay annual costs for all of your users. And pretty much most direct users of Salesforce require some sort of license. Some require more expensive licenses if they're using the Sales Cloud functionality of Salesforce, and then some can get by with less expensive licensing. Does anybody in here have any trouble with Microsoft and CALs? Kind of an old concept that created a lot of problems. Salesforce kind of operates in a very similar way, but with, I would call, CALs on steroids. And this can be very expensive. So for example, if you're the size of CU and you have, say, 30,000 students that need to access an application in Salesforce, and you have to pay like $5 at a very minimum for their licenses. That can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. And let's face it, for the most part, Salesforce is not going to be a replacement for your enterprise systems. It's basically, if you make an extensive investment in another system for course bidding or course registration or student information systems, there's a good chance that you're going to keep that system, but you're going to need to have a way to integrate with it. So when we talk about planning considerations, we might call these kind of lessons learned from our project. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the, a few intricacies here as we go. When we're kind of planning a Salesforce project, we want to consider, first of all, what your organization's motivation for doing so is and where you're at in the current pain point. Because the easiest way to fail a Salesforce project or a CRM project or an enterprise project of any kind is to basically walk into a room and basically say, we're from IT and we're here to help. We know you've got some problems and we're going to solve them for you. We actually had a pretty good sequence of, or series of events and a great alumni a great director of alumni who we worked with, who actually championed our Salesforce project to start out in 2013, 2014. She basically went in and is still what we would consider a power user of Salesforce. And she had this kind of gigantic spreadsheet. We're going to call it Franken spreadsheet, kind of a plan the term Frankenstein. And the spreadsheet had more than 100 columns. And what we would call it is probably a flattened structure of a relational database. So every contact had a row, and then every time they needed to track something new, they just tack on more and more and more columns of that spreadsheet. So basically, the first part of that project was eliminating that spreadsheet for her. We constructed a relational data model in Salesforce that could store all of the relevant aspects of what they were trying to track. And then through a series of sometimes painful data integrations or data transformations and imports, we were able to pull all of that data into Salesforce. And then as kind of an added bonus, we were able to start synchronizing that data across to our career development system, which is based on Simplicity, PSM. One of the things that you want to identify is which systems are authoritative for which attributes. So for us, we actually required multi-master replication because we identified a scenario where if we updated contact information in Salesforce and it flowed through to our career development system, that wouldn't be necessarily the only update that was possible because students and alumni can log into the career development system and they can change their own attributes like their first name, last name, address, all that information. So we needed to find a way to be able to merge the two. Another consideration is which APIs are available. If you can probably automate anything if you're willing to put enough pain into it. But realistically, some APIs are better than others. Salesforce has a really great API. Simplicity has an API that leaves some things to be desired. And we also want to consider a little bit about the timing of your updates. For pretty much everything that we do, batch is just fine. Typically, within a day, everybody's happy. Some organizations convince themselves that they need real-time synchronous updates where you're calling web services basically with every click or whatnot. Yeah.
Mike, what's the schedule that you do your LSACs to into your systems? What's that synchronicity?
That happens daily currently.
Oh, it's a daily, okay.
Yep. Yep. And so to digress here for a moment, between LSAC, ACES2, and our enterprise system, we basically move data there, but we don't currently track data from ACES2 in Salesforce until we're finalized for our class for the year. and then we just do a one-time import at that point. We're actually going to be engaging in a process over the next couple of weeks, probably a month or so, to actually make that more, not real time, but just have that be more of a continuous process as opposed to like a one-time load. But going back to the point here, you may not actually be able to technologically build out a real-time synchronization system. For example, on the simplicity side, one of the things that we have to do is we have to run a report that returns a list of all of the user IDs so that we can then roll through and grab all of those contact records individually. Unfortunately, we can't actually send a query to that web service that basically says, just give me all of the contacts updated since yesterday. And so unless you're going to kind of continuously run that process, which is just sort of a waste to sort of figure out, okay, it's unlikely that we're going to have a change in both systems simultaneously, but if we do, this one is going to win. And that's the kind of the flow that we work through, and we're just figuring out which systems we're going to determine are authoritative. Alluded to this a little bit, but we basically have 3 high-level integration strategies with Salesforce and any other systems. You can basically go through continuous manual effort, where you basically dump a spreadsheet out, you make some sort of changes to that spreadsheet, and then you import it into another system. If you've never had a problem with this, then I would propose that you haven't run it for long enough. Anybody else here had trouble with this kind of process? Okay. The second integration strategy with Salesforce is basically something from the App Exchange. If you're familiar with the App Store on your phone, this is basically the same sort of idea. You have a tool that is published out on the App Exchange. You can link it up with your organization, and it does something for you. For example, not there anymore, but the Constant Contact app used to be able to work into your Salesforce organization and send email communications out based on data in your Salesforce org. There's another tool out there called Salesforce Connect. This is primarily uses the new kind of open data specification that's kind of been produced by the big database companies. And it's used to connect natively to other data sources from Salesforce. Kind of use case for this is if you need to access a very small set of data kind of on a continuous real-time basis. But if you need to pull large data sets from one of those systems into Salesforce, it's not a good tool for that. And there are a lot of other technical and security concerns with the way that would operate as well, because you basically have this cloud-based service that is on a real-time basis going in and grabbing data out of one of your databases that's probably behind any series of firewalls. And kind of the third integration strategy that we're going to present is custom development, which is essentially the way that we went. The good side of custom development is you can get to do everything that you want it to do. The bad side of custom development is you have to make it do everything that you want it to do, right?
And actually one of the challenges too on the App Exchange, so we had an experience where we purchased an app, and then because of poor integration on that side, it negatively impacted our data. So we ended up with duplicated records, we ended up with data getting changed. So we had someone along to were spouses, they shared an email address because the external tool was matching on email. We had all kinds of unexpected behavior going through where the spouse's names were actually changing in Salesforce on a record, which then flowed through to Simplicity CSM. Just be aware of external integrations and make sure that you have a good understanding of what they may do. And we didn't find this until a month or two after the integration, because we only had maybe 20 or 30 spousal pairs, I guess that's what we call it. So we didn't notice that until later.
Yeah, luckily one of our instrumentation practices that we do, for better or for worse, is that we log all data changes. So anytime that we're having our integration make a change out there in a system, we're logging what the value was before and what it was after. So this creates a little bit of a kind of a longer log file. It's going to take a little bit more space on disk, but it provides a very last case scenario for if you need to get data back, you can still do it. And so we have that capability. Another point.
Are you finding yourself with all this external data? Are you using it? I mean, that's a question. We've looked at whether or not we should have ACEs or simplicity stuff inserted in there, and whether or not every application we put in, regardless if they got admitted or not, if we should put those in there. Our use of Salesforce is mainly for our dean, so that she can go through and say, okay, here's the career development. Here's the client. Our constituents and stuff like that. But whether or not we need all the admission information or not, that's still on the question of whether or not we really need it or not.
We've actually got quite a lot of, we are pretty heavy users of Salesforce. And what we find it's kind of golden spot is for us is that we basically have a subset of a lot of other systems that's in Salesforce. And so it's easy for users to go out and create basic reports. And in addition, the way that our integration works is we actually store a local copy in SQL of all of the Salesforce objects as well. So it makes it very easy to construct new reports. It makes it easy to basically build out more complicated reports out in something like an ASP.NET MVC. And you basically do some sort of graphical front end for like maybe D3 or something like that. You can build out really cool things like that, and then if you, kind of a newer thing in the data science world is a tool called Tableau. Any Tableau users here? Okay, Tableau. Tableau can talk to SQL, and you can basically have Tableau reports based on your Salesforce data. It makes it kind of nice.
I think the challenge is, so we want to keep users in their native systems. So, they're not incentivized to duplicate entry or to work with another tools like our career development staff. They want to stay in simplicity CSM, that's what they're familiar with. But we want that data out of CSM as well, so we can look at it longitudinally. And you're right, it's our system being for student affairs. She wants to be able to see what's going on in admission, what's going on in career development, what students need support. So I think we look at it as kind of a roll-up system with limited reporting.
Our situation basically, it revolves around our development system, because our Salesforce entity is actually synchronized with our development system, which is an advanced SunGuard system, and everything's being dictated by the advanced system because they're synchronizing Salesforce back with advanced, which they're intertwining with each other. And so the development people said, do I really need simplicity stuff in there? Do I need stuff from ACEs in there? And then you have our Tableau people saying, well, let's integrate directly into ACEs so that we can give you information there. So we're not having a separate SQL database. It's actually going into our, production advanced system as well. And then you have all these other colleges on campus that are using that, and they're trying to lock down information so that we don't see their undergrad information, even though that might be important to us. But so there's a lot of politics involved with our data with that, and so that's why we've been kind of narrowing down on what information do we really want in there. Plus, our admissions office says, well, that's just extra work for us to have to get that integrated, and career development's the same way. And so, it's just questions on whether or not, if you're truly using that information and if it should be really integrated back into your development systems.
Yeah, bottom line is we're truly using that information. And it does need to be integrated for that purpose. Unfortunately, nothing about this presentation is going to help you with the political issues.
Yeah, no, I know.
Give me your answer.
No.
If you have an answer, I would love to see a presentation on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So going back to John's point, one of the things that I should have mentioned from that particular viewpoint is that life is hard in the App Exchange world. If you're going out and you're building an app for Salesforce and App Exchange and you're expecting it to produce actual money, particularly enough to actually continue to support its development and support, it's going to be really hard. And so one of the issues that you have to watch out for is that vendors will abandon apps out there. It happens all the time. Yeah, something that works well, you may find one day that either it stops working or that the vendors just pulled it completely, and there's very little that you can do about it. There's a good chance that you'll have the data still because it probably lives in your Salesforce org, but in terms of ongoing functionality or broken things, yeah, you're probably SOL.
And one of the challenges too that we ran across is our vendor, they had a good standalone product. They were not hired a consultant to build an integration with Salesforce. That seemed like a good idea, but they were not even clear on how to support their own app. So they're trying to track down a consultant to move on to other things. Yeah, and they were a big name. They were pretty well known. So.
Yeah, make sure you use good vendor management practices. Make sure they're going to support the app going forward. Another important planning consideration is you have to consider what you have in terms of your team, or what can you get in terms of your team in terms of development resources. You really can't have you really can't use what you don't have. One of the things that I would consider here is hiring a good all-around development team as opposed to people who specialize specifically in Salesforce. If you hire a higher priced person who is specifically in Salesforce, then they're going to produce a code-heavy organization because that's what they know how to do. If you hire people who are good all-around developers who have worked with a lot of different technologies, then there's a good chance that they're going to be able to produce integrations that work pretty well for you over the long run, but they're not going to be native to Salesforce. And so it depends on how important that question is to you. It has to be native to Salesforce. For us, we actually have independent systems that are maintained both in Java and for .NET for different purposes. Like there's actually kind of a neat little constrained optimization tool that we use that's offered as a Java library. And we basically maintain a Java integration just to do that, and use it for things like exam conflicts and course scheduling, and yeah, it's actually a pretty great tool. So always pick the best tool for the job, and not the one that minimizes the number of technologies in use, unless you're willing to basically go out and build everything you need in that one technology. We kind of touched on this with your point of direct access to the data. If you are integrating with other systems, do you have access to that data at the SQL level? Do you have to access to an API? Do you just have flat file exports you have to work with? Can you build out your own reports? It's like one of the things that we have in Campus Solutions, since it's a PeopleSoft product, is we have a tool called PS Query. It's pretty handy for constructing queries, but we have other challenges in terms of actually getting that out in an automated way, but we've ultimately solved those. So this is kind of an app exchange sort of issue. If you're going to construct a new, let me ask you a question. Do you use HITA?
Sorry?
In your organization, have you guys implemented HITA?
Ethan?
So higher ed data.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's possible.
This is basically a set of objects that Salesforce has tried to standardize for the higher ed market. And so if you don't know if you're using it, there's a good chance that you're probably not, because it's something you would probably have to install from the App Exchange. The goal was really to provide developers and integrators of Salesforce apps a consistent set of objects to use for developing applications to market to higher ed. Problem is that you probably have 10 people in the room and 11 different ways of doing things and storing data, right? And so their object model is pretty simplified, and it's going to be really hard to integrate an enterprise system like PeopleSoft or Campus Solutions with HITA, simply because HITA is too simplified, and you'd have to extend HITA and customize it to make it do what you probably need to do. Our implementation was before HITA came out, and we have some overlapping data features. Like they tried to partially solve this multiple affiliations issue, but right now we just aren't really planning to implement HITA in the foreseeable future. It's something, but it is a consideration for you if you're just starting out or you're working on expanding a Salesforce project. Here's our kind of a high-level description of how things work for us. We have our on-premises application servers and VMs. We communicate with Salesforce primarily via the...
Excuse me.
Yep.
Sorry, before you go on, could I ask a question about HIDA? And sorry if you said this. How is that different? Do you know how that's different from their like related Target X product?
Yeah, I think so. Because actually, I don't honestly know a whole lot about what was the product name you said?
So my understanding is Salesforce has a product called Target X, which they developed for higher education applications.
Target X. That's new. Or it must be really new. I haven't heard of it yet. Yeah, maybe it supersedes HIDA.
Okay.
But I don't know. Salesforce also kind of has a tendency to produce a lot of different things to do the same thing, right? So that it could just be an option, something that they're trying, or perhaps it supersedes HIDA in some way. But apologies, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. In terms of our implementation, we basically have our on-premises servers that we use for a lot of different things: data storage, web application servers, you name it. And we communicate to Salesforce via the SOAP and Enterprise API. And we have another tool called Simplicity, CSM, and we communicate via the student and report APIs for that tool. As we mentioned before, Salesforce has, on average, a better API than other tools. And then we communicate to the LSAC ACES2 system, actually currently through the browser automation. So we use their reporting features, and we use their file imports, and we basically have a tool that uses browser automation to do that. With ACES2 in particular, you actually have another option. They have an API out there which basically downloads the reports and puts them out in a format that you can work with. But our challenge with it is that we needed both the capability to download and upload data through the API. And despite a mention in their latest documentation that I've received that they have an import API, we've never been able to actually get documentation for how it's supposed to work. So, yep.
Actually, just to quickly jump to your question about Target X. So Target X is a third-party app. So that's an external company that leverages the Salesforce platform. So it's not actually part of Salesforce. So either the higher ed data architecture that is by Salesforce, yeah, and that's an actual data architecture that they can set up for higher ed to try to meet some of the needs. Yeah, but yeah, it's a third-party company.
Okay, got it. I thought it was from Salesforce, but okay. Okay, thank you.
App Exchange risk right there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see the lifecycle.
Okay. All right. Yep. So project management considerations. Just as it's true as in any organization, with CU, yeah, if we throw a rock somewhere, we can probably improve something with that particular process. But I'm going to kind of put it out there again that poor or non-existent processes can't be automated or assisted, really. So if the people that touch a process can't tell you how it works, and even with being able to document like routine exceptions to that process, there's a good chance that you're never going to be able to do anything from a technical perspective to help that. One of the things that I would consider is actually just take on something like a lean effort before working with Salesforce or other systems. The bottom line of it is that you have to be able to describe your process to be able to reduce steps and waste and basically make it work well for you. Salesforce projects can quickly explode in terms of scope. So you'll have people, particularly at high levels of the organization, who will respond to what I would call the siren call of one system. We're going to have one system that does everything. We're going to have one system that stores everything. And as soon as you do that, it's not going to happen. No chance. So Salesforce is, again, a tool in a larger system. It's got its pros and its cons. It's worthwhile for the purposes that we set out to do. And in terms of just general project management stuff, do we have any PMP, PMI sort of people here? At least one? Okay. Yeah, this is going to be old news for you, but at a minimum, develop a project charter and stick to it. You're going to get request after request, and you're going to have to say no, or let's revisit that in 6 months, or in a few rare cases, you may actually go through the integrated change management process to bring that into scope for your project. Yeah, be ready to try to see the first bit of your project through, at the very least. Develop a good work breakdown structure, a network diagram, and a rough timeline. For those who don't know what it is, work breakdown structure kind of gives you basically a hierarchical view of the steps needed to complete a project. Not necessarily measured by time or in order, but measured in terms of the pieces of scope. Network diagram gives you a bit about the dependencies between everything that you put into your work breakdown structure. And a timeline is basically falls out of that dependency and that scope artifact in terms of showing you a Gantt chart that shows you when your project might actually be done. Organizations that don't do this tend to be surprised when their Salesforce project isn't completed in the first 3 to 6 months. For us, it was a good couple of years to really get everything off the ground in the way that we need to be in terms of our initial scope. Then again, that may have been a little bit more in terms of resources. Like if we had more resources, you can constrain in the timeline a little bit with that. One of the things that's really important for us in terms of the way that we operate, since we don't have a lot of people, we have to rely on our end users to do certain things. So if they need routine data imports, give them the access to do routine data imports. Otherwise, you'll find that your vacations or your holidays are spent doing routine data imports. At least for me, I'm pretty sure that I can find a full-time job out of everything that I still have to do when I don't have to do something else by hand. Is that pretty much true for everybody else here? Yep. So in terms of end user empowerment, we want to make sure that users have the knowledge to use the system, that they have everything that they need built within their tool set, whichever system that happens to be in. We want them to know that they're responsible for certain things. So for example, if you give them access to do data imports, make sure that they know they're responsible for it, and that they ultimately have authority over their subsets of the system. If they need features, they have the authority to request them, and they have the authority to make decisions, even ones that may be less technically sound. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, accountability. We've tracked this process pretty well through. Users know what they're responsible for. They have the ability to make important decisions related to their sets of the tool. And ultimately, they're accountable for using that tool correctly and within the agreed upon way. Again, we're really focused on self-sufficiency. As opposed to, it's easy to get into a pattern where you get requests to help desk in a large organization, or you get a request by email in a smaller organization, where you say, I could build something out that would allow them to do this, but it's going to take a little bit of time. So I'm going to do it for them manually just this once. Unfortunately, that sets you up for having to continually do that for the next perpetuity, essentially. Because it's easy to fall into that trap of saying, okay, over the medium and long run, I'm going to spend a heck of a lot more time doing this by hand than I am to actually just build a process for it in the first place. Does anybody here have like routine data exports and imports out of other systems where they have to change at least like 5 to 10% of the rows by hand each time? Yeah. That's a classic example of that. It takes you 5 minutes to produce that spreadsheet. When you measure it over a couple of years, it's probably taking you 40 hours. And so if you just take maybe 5 to 10 hours, maybe 20 on the front end to make it an automatic process, then you pretty much just never have to do that again unless something breaks with it. It really puts you into true like break fix sort of mentality with it. One of the things that we're starting to move away from in terms of our processes is these kind of once a semester, once a quarter, once a year processes. These are extremely high risk for us because you sort of think, well, how did I do this last year? Has anything changed since last year? And the answer to the latter question is almost always yes. And so unless you're keeping up with the user requirements in terms of a more continuous process, there's a good chance that the process that you used last year to load the data isn't the same process you have to use this year. And you're going to introduce errors and things that you're going to have to correct by hand, which once again kind of has a snowballing effect in terms of having to use much more time and resources to fix that. So any specific discussion question points that we haven't talked about so far?
Because I imagine you guys have looked at the playing field in terms of maybe an end-to-end product like Starfish, which UNM dumped after a time. If I'd like to get to the alumni point, but if I narrow the band from the LSACs, the incoming student data, to really tracking outcomes as far as identifying where a student maybe is going to fail out of law school, and leave the alumni aside, is there a suite product, something out there that you guys have seen that would help or do that?
It comes down to the systems that you're integrating with and the tools available to you. At least on the LSAC side, do you currently use like their API client to download data and do that process? Mm-hmm. It depends on what you're trying to integrate it with. Like, what are you trying to put the LSAC data into?
Well, we've got somewhat similar situation. We've got UNM uses Banner, okay. Which with some work, we'd probably be able to get a read-only view of data. We wouldn't get change. So we've got Banner. We've got a shadow system as well with our registrar. So that data, I think, would be fair to say is real-time. And I think for the system, too, that we'd be looking at, we'd only need a few eyeballs like that. Associate Dean, you guys have got just a few people. So in terms of licensing, we wouldn't need the students. They wouldn't need to get in, look at it, just a few people to really looking for a trend line. Maybe later on we can have a larger view of the outcome, but we're trying to identify a student that's coming into a problem, area.
For us, that's Salesforce. So yeah, we have a tool that we have built out custom. They're called Student Support Network, and that's part of the reason we're pulling some of these other data points in. But that's really help identify the risk grades, are they not engaged in terms of activities at the law school, or they're maybe not looking at emails, or something else they're looking at integrated with my law. Getting a sense of how engaged they are.
And Salesforce will do this.
Well, with a custom, creating custom objects.
Yeah, like
seeking that data. Yeah.
So I may not have made this clear enough in the presentation, but I think that customizing a Salesforce object model to do what you need to do in terms of tracking data, that's perfectly fine. That's fair game. It works well. It basically provides you the ability to build out a data model and a way to edit and add data to it at the same time. And it works pretty well for users. It's pretty intuitive. That users get along well with it in our organization. Where you're going to run into difficulties with Salesforce is when you have to start doing more application type work with it. Like if you're building out things that go beyond the basic page layouts in Salesforce, or you're trying to build out basically applications that do things like you're building out a registration system or whatnot. and you're finding yourself more in the Visual Force or Apex world, those are the integrations that are going to become a lot more expensive, a lot harder to maintain over time. In terms of the original question, I don't know, I haven't used Banner personally, but I would suspect that you can probably do some sort of at least flat file export of it. And so if you can find an NVM product that is able to take in flat files, which I'm pretty sure almost all of them do, you just have to have one that's able to export it to Salesforce in the way that you need it to be exported.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions, discussion points? Cool. Well, thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That's